Obviously, today's been dominated by commentators pulling apart the performance by Joe Biden, and we'll get into that in a sec. But I've got to tell you, on Monday night here on Sky, to recognise a very significant milestone, which is the 60th anniversary of the first edition of the Australian newspaper, launched by that great Australian Rupert Murdoch in Canberra on July 15th, 1964. Now, I had a sneak preview last night, and Rupert was asked about his critics, including one Mr Malcolm Turnbull. He didn't hold back.
I think Malcolm's nuts. I mean, he's paranoid. He didn't like the fact that we supported Tony Abbott versus him. That's all.
Is what Rupert reckons Malcolm is. He's being a bit kind.
Yeah, I think he is. In fact, understated beautifully. But look, he is quite nuts. He's self-centred as well. So if he was a bar of chocolate, he'd be a soft nut, really, in a lot of ways. Look, the sad part about Malcolm is it's all about Malcolm. Like Kevin Rudd, all about Kevin. And both of them always left me with the impression I was just lucky to have been able to be in the same room with them on occasions. So look, I can't disagree with anything that Mr Murdoch said there. Pretty simple. I think he's got his finger on the pulse. Most Australians do reminisce very strongly and rightly so about how good the Howard years were. And frankly, with the exception of probably Tony Abbott, it's been, he was the only blip that came along
to
hasn't repair things. Things haven't been all that good since.
Amanda, I think the one
Howard
ex-Prime Minister who's behaved very well, Julia Gillard. She's just been nowhere.
Well, what's interesting is whether you liked Julia Gillard or not, she was actually quite respectful to the people around her. She didn't come across arrogant. She didn't come across self-righteous and everything that pretty much Malcolm Turnbull did. And she, you know, really did try in a lot of areas to help the people, and rightly so that, you know, unfortunately Turnbull was all about Turnbull. And
he'll tell you he's the smartest person in the room. Don't worry about that.
When someone tells you they're the smartest person in the room, they're usually not, right? It's usually, you know, superiority and inferiority are two sides of the same coin. So that should tell you a lot about the man.
Gary, as I said, I started work as a 17-year-old, can you believe that, at the Adelaide News, which is Rupert's first paper, way back in 1972. And the Australian, in my view, and you'd have an opinion on this for sure, the Australian, starting in 64, really changed the newspaper landscape. And we were working on pretty parochial tabloids, and what the Australian did was it encouraged a national conversation. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's important that we are proud of where we come from. We get pretty parochial here in Queensland, almost as parochial as Victorians. And I mean, that's the point, Steve. Everybody is proud of their particular parish, but to think as Australians, I think is an important point. And most of us, I do believe, are loudly Australian whenever we travel overseas. We like to explain our part of the big picture, but the Australian has actually allowed a national conversation about a lot of things. And so that vision, which was a huge risk 60 years ago, I think has really made Australia grow up a hell of a lot, and that's good.
We talk about business a lot when we have you on. I mean, Rupert Murdoch's got to go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest Australian businessman ever with what he's achieved.
Pretty much, especially...
The paper I started on was on North Terrace in Adelaide. It was a small tabloid afternoon paper. In the old days when people were smoking and clacking away on typewriters, he's turned that into a global company.
Well, that's right, and it's hard. So I think people really underestimate how hard it is to build a business of any size, especially a media business where, you know, it is now, it's 24/7. My goodness, you've got to be on the pulse. But any business is hard, and it's really, like with the Australian in particular, they cover a lot of businesses and small business stories, which is crucial because they are the heart of the country, and often that's forgotten by the politicians.
Gary, I'll tell you why I loved working on that paper. Guess what my first job was back then? This was in 1972 in October, and I was sent up to the local courts, the Magistrates Court, because Joe Cocker, who was touring with his band, had been arrested the night before in possession of marijuana, and I had to run up there as fast as my little legs would take me, get the pictures of Joe Cocker being dragged into court, and head back down to the head office. That's why I loved my job from day one, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk about horses for courses, but the fact that they hired you was in itself probably a bit of a risk, Steve, but good on you for having that story. I understand that the late Joe Cocker told that story to a lot of people over the years. He remembered you well.
Yeah, he did. You can watch the Australian 60 Years of News right here on Sky on Monday night at 8 o'clock. I want to get your both reaction to Biden's terrible performance today. It was meant to be the press conference he redeemed himself at, but he failed so miserably. Amanda, it took one question at the start and he started calling Donald Trump the black vice president, Kamala Harris.
I think now it's gotten to that stage that whoever is putting him in public like that should be charged, right, for
elder abuse.
Oh, absolutely elder abuse. But it is what's going on? So why are they keep doing that? It's more than just the fact that they want to win. What are they hiding? You know, because we're all talking about it and we're not paying attention to what's really going on in the country right now. So I think someone, if they had the time and the money to actually investigate, if they don't get shot doing it, to find out what's really going on. But what they're doing to him is absolutely appalling and it's cruel. And it breaks my heart seeing an elderly man with, you know, obvious issues being absolutely used by not only his family, by the Democratic Party because of their, you know, greed or whatever reason.
Gary, I said at the top of the program, we all need a strong America. I mean, they're our greatest ally. We've got China sitting up there to the north and making all sorts of aggressive noises about places like Taiwan and other places. How is it that a country that could produce people like, you know, JFK, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, why can they not find two better candidates than these two jokers?
Well, look, we certainly need another Ronald Wilson Reagan, who I think was the best president in my lifetime so far, Steve. I mean, that's just my take on it. A lot of people would readily agree with that. Reagan ended the Cold War. He tore the wall down with Mr. Gorbachev. But there's no vision, there's no plan, big plan for the future. And, you know, in a lot of ways, how sad it is that America's been subjected to really a very slow con here. And now everybody knows it. You know, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. But this bloke Biden has been hidden away from the public. He won in 2020 because he was hidden in the bunker. COVID gave him the cover. And since then, I don't think he's been running the country. And the serious part about this is it's not whether he can actually contest and win the next election. It's what's going to happen at the next crisis, the next problem. Who's actually making the decisions? Because evidently he's not. He's reminiscing. He's talking about trying to finish off a job. No, we don't want people to go into Parliament just to finish off a job. We want them to actually set up the next generation for success. I see no vision from Joe Biden. I see no certainty about Joe Biden. I'm worried about what his job's going to be like next week, not just simply next year and next term. And I think Americans are starting to wake up to the fact they've been conned over the last 4 or 5 years by the Democrats. Yeah,
it's been reported today that he hasn't even had a cabinet meeting since last October. So you just don't know how you can run an economy like America doing that. I want to get on to these reports that show how much our hospitality industry is struggling. Twice as many hospitality businesses like cafes, restaurants going bust as they were 10 years ago. And to add insult to injury, major food supplier Independent Food Distributors Australia warns we could soon be facing $10 coffees and $100 steak and chips if nothing gets done about rising costs. Now, Amanda, you're out there all the time. I mean, we're already paying over $5 for a coffee that was costing us probably $3 a year or 2 years ago.
That's right.
Everything has gone through the roof.
That's right. And they're just the businesses that have stayed open. The ones that have closed and the employees are now unemployed. But we need to always remind people, don't blame the small business for the $10 coffee. Vote the Labor Party out because they're the ones that have decimated the small business community. And if they're in for another term, they will destroy it because it has literally been 2 years and 1,000 businesses are closing per day.
You hear one a day, two a day?
Oh, constantly. So every time I'm online and I get messages from people, those who aren't shutting down are working 24/7, 7 days a week as a family business just to stay afloat.
Gary, I was speaking to a bloke who runs a chain of restaurants a couple of weeks ago. He's paying a barista on Sunday more than $80 an hour.
Yeah, and that was a skill I wished I'd taken up. But look, Steve, let's face it, mates of mine who are in small business, a restaurateur I know. He said, how can I set my price on my menu when I don't know what the price of my wages are going to be? Superannuation is going up, which is wages forgone. You don't get that, you pay back it, but the boss pays it out. Insurances have gone up, absolutely. The cost of electricity is a major driver because it's about keeping food cool as well as cooking. Those sorts of things. How can he set a restaurant meal price at the retail end when he doesn't know what his input costs are going to be, 6 months from now? Plus, he's got to get the menus constantly reprinted, and that's another cost to the business. So these are realities these Labor union officials running the country currently don't care about, and frankly, they're only interested in big business, big unions, big government.
We needed a real debate about the taxes that are levied on businesses.
Absolutely. It's the number one thing. I did a survey. The number one thing is the taxes on small business, and they can't survive, and that no one is listening to them. Their local MPs, their federal MPs are not listening to them and not returning calls or emails.
So it's a state issue and a federal issue.
Absolutely.
Payroll taxes.
Yeah, both state and federal. They're not
tax.
returning their calls or emails and their calls of distress. It's like a deliberate action to shut them down. And so as a community, we need to help each other as much as possible.
Gary, what's your upper limit on a skinny latte, or are you an almond latte guy?
No, I'll be a skinny one, mate, but a skinny cappuccino, $5.20. If that's what the cost is, you've got to pay it. I paid that in Sydney the other day, I must admit.
Madness.
And thought, wow, $4 was pretty well the standard. We make ours at home, which is not good for retailers,
crazy.
but that's the
Amanda,
reality. We're all looking for the DIY
thanks for joining
answer.
us. Yeah, we are. Good on you, Gary. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, mate.